when I before I made contact with UCL, before I went through whatever it was that I went through, I was self-employed. And I remember thinking back, I was only like a small, medium size. I was employing like, you know, four full-time and a couple of part-time employees on myself. And I remember thinking back then, if it had been up to me to offer somebody in my state a placement, I wouldn't want anywhere near it. I just wouldn't have. I just wouldn't have. I wouldn't have wanted the hassle. I wouldn't have wanted the. I just wouldn't have wanted it, you know. And then there I was, you know, a few years afterwards, like, you know, and needing somebody and I suppose like not even so much take a chance, but just be willing to sort of like go through that process by taking somebody on who maybe who was obviously struggling, you know, mental health big time, but we're willing to do that. So that maybe that's just, and that's just from a personal point of view. I'm not even saying for 1 second that other businesses would think that way, but that was from my own personal perspective. The other thing I can think about in that stat is just, you know, the current climate, how things are, how businesses are struggling, and that's only just something that I know from my own work, and I do know that businesses do struggle, and they struggle to even cut a profit. So maybe there's something around that. Maybe there's a bit about a stigma around that as well. I think there is, for as much as there's all this mental health awareness and disability awareness, I think there is still that stigma attached to it. And I don't know how you're going to eradicate that ever. Maybe it's just constant learning. Maybe it's more and more experiences like this and more positive stuff. Because mine was pretty much 90% a positive experience. You know, it really was. The organisation that I got placed into by UCL, they couldn't have done more for me. And UCL, and the fact that I knew that UCL were there in the background to offer support, was a good thing to know. It wasn't just that I was just in there on my own. I certainly didn't feel that I was in there on my own. I felt very much protected. Certainly that first year and a half. Geraldine Lawless would have called down. I was based out in the Loughnane Discovery Centre. So she would have called down once a month, I think, you know, maybe even more regular than that, at early stages. So it always felt that there was somebody there who had my back. Because it was difficult, like, it really, really was. Yeah, big time. Just, I mean, like I was struggling with addiction. You know, I'm 17 years sober, just Friday passed, and but at that stage when I registered with UCL, I think I was 2 years sober. My business had closed down. I tried to work for another similar business for a few months, and it just wasn't working out. Had my own psychiatrist. I was under the mental health team. So I had a community psychiatric nurse, a psychiatrist out in Bluestone, which it was just home care. But I was experiencing just such a high level of depression, and even just in social things like, you know, just social anxiety, like really, really heightened social anxiety, to the point that when I was meant to start my first day with UCL, I didn't have a car. Everything had went. I was living in a wee rented house in Portadown, and the first day that I was due to go out to the Discovery Centre, they sent a taxi for me, and I could see I was sitting in the house waiting at like about 10 to 9. I saw the taxi, and the thought occurred to me: just hide, just don't go to the door. And he's only a taxi driver. Like, he's gonna probably ring the doorbell once, maybe, and then he'll go on. And that was a real thought, because there was nobody else there. I was on my own in the house. I was like, I don't have to go ahead with this here. Like, you know, people know I'm sick. And that was a big thing to overcome. And then just the other stuff of just meeting people and just being in that setting. Now it seems it's just completely manageable. But to walk in there, and like Geraldine was there on my first day, and the guy who was going to be my line manager, he came down, and so we met down in the wee cafe down there, and then he brought me up to the office. But it was just like, and I was only doing 3 days a week. I was doing Monday, Wednesday was a full day, and then a half day on Friday. I remember coming home and like just feeling just mentally exhausted. The unfortunate thing is that for as much support and as much guidance on sort of even like that feeling of being protected or having somebody there fighting your corner, I suppose, to a certain degree, that's probably the best way that I could describe my experience with UCL was like, I had somebody there and I identified that as Geraldine, like Geraldine was in my corner. It was still very much, there was a certain amount of it was up to me. Ultimately it was up to me. And the other thing was as well, I had gotten comfortable. To a certain degree, I'd gotten comfortable. I was very, very much sheltered in my own sort of recovery. As I'm still in active recovery, but at that stage it was an early recovery. I felt very much protected with the type of recovery mechanism that I was involved in and still am. And they weren't worried about whether I was back at work or whether, all they were worried about was whether I stayed sober, and that seemed to be the primary concern. But it was something inside me that kind of felt, and I had a young, my eldest now, he's 18, like, but back at that stage, he'd only have been 3. And I remembered looking at him and thinking, like, I remember putting myself under pressure as regards to looking at my son and kind of thinking, what's he going to think of me? Like, I want him to sort of be proud of me and stuff like that. So there was this feeling inside that I wanted to get back into work. And that's what prompted me to make that step. But by goodness, like I regretted it all the way for those first few months, like, because it was like, why am I putting myself through this, because of the way it was making me feel. It was really, I would have struggled at the start. And if I had been doing that on my own, if UCL hadn't been there, if Geraldine hadn't been there, I could have very well just not turned up. I really would have. There was a couple of mornings I was really, really struggling. Even the thought of going in and doing another full day, even that second day, just the thought of that. Am I making progress here? Is this making me worse? Because like I would have like maybe even went to bed, maybe had like a particularly good day where it was basic duties that I was doing, like, it wasn't taxing work, like, it was basic duties, and Geraldine kept on checking in and stuff and making sure that I wasn't being asked to do too much and things like that. But I would have went home feeling really, really positive on whatever happens when you go to sleep and you wake up the next morning and it's just like the weight of the world's on your shoulders, and it feels like it's just too high of a mountain to climb. And social anxiety, it was like really, really suffered. Like I was on a lot of medication at the start to do with depression and stuff like that. So there was a lot of things going on. There really was, but ultimately there was plenty of opportunities for me to turn around and just say, like, what, I'm not going to do this. This isn't working. But the fact that there was something there around me, surrounding me, and that was to do with my recovery as well. I felt that for the first time in my life I was doing something really positive, and I was dealing with my addiction. But secondly, that I had somebody there supporting me, because it's difficult out there to be out of work anyway. And even back then, for however many years, 15 years ago, even back then it was difficult to be out of work. It was the first time I'd ever been out of work in my adult life. So it was a lot of stuff to experience. And early stages, there was so much going on. It was divorce, the business closed. Everything just got cleared. The decks just got completely cleared. But it seemed to be that from those like really bare foundations, I kind of started building things up, and there was a couple of significant things happened as well. Early on, I got there was a lady who worked up there in the Discovery Centre in a completely different department. And she had spotted me, and so she knew Geraldine, and she had talked about me coming on board to work with them and that part of the council. So all of a sudden, then I was 5 days a week, and I was being given things that had a wee bit more responsibility, and that was all right. That was okay. It was still, I had a lot of support from UCL as regards training, even got my own laptop and things like that. Just those sort of basic things that I couldn't have done myself. Like back then, you got to remember, like back then, email was still a new thing. It really was. Like it was just it's hard to believe. Like, but So there was a lot of like even that whole IT side of it and stuff like that. So I got a lot of training there, and then just basic sort of like management of your workload and things like that. So Geraldine, UCell were very good. I keep on saying Geraldine because she's my identification of UCell. But very, very good as regards to support. And again, I don't know how I would have managed if I hadn't had that. I really don't, because for as good as the council were, and they were a really good employer to have, because I got so much experience across different fields, in a short space of time. I think the fact that UCL were there ultimately to manage me, or to manage any sort of eventuality that might have came about. I think that maybe at the coming out of it, when my sort of relationship with UCL sort of like stopped. Well, it didn't really actually stop at all, because it was still always what I seen Geraldine talk before about the other stuff that had happened. You were going to sort of like dinners and awards and stuff like that, but just coming out of it again and not having that direct sort of or that direct need of support, I can still remember how it felt. It doesn't seem a million miles away. I've worked for that council. I ended up working for them for 14 years, and then I've changed. I've went to Lisburn and Castlereagh Council, and I've been there for almost a year. So it's been a big old journey, but I can still remember how I felt. I really can. I even the horror of being asked to go down at break time for a cup of coffee with all the ones who were working up in the office, and lunch times was just like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to, I'm meeting people and shaking people's hands and stuff like that. It was just like, I kind of thought there's a big neon sign above my head saying mental. That's how I felt. And if I've learned anything, it's basically if you can shake somebody's hand and say yes, please, and thank you, they think you're normal, and that's basically it. And sometimes I used to think I'd rather have a broken leg, or I'd rather have a broken arm where people can actually see it. They can see the cast, or they can see that I'm actually holding physical crutches. And I'd probably get a wee bit more understanding sometimes. But that's not their fault, because everybody's got their own stuff. Everybody's got their own stuff, and I was looking at other people thinking they've got everything sorted, and I'm the only one who feels this way. No, everybody's sort of like fumbling about, like in a dark room trying to find a light switch. That's basically what everybody's doing. But it's the perception that I had. I think in community, I think there's lots of really, really good work that's carried out, even just by individual community groups, and that's just stuff that I know myself. In a work setting, there's lots of awareness initiatives and things that get rolled out, and sometimes they're all well intentioned. I think they're all well intentioned, but sometimes it's not coming from a position of experience. It's more coming from knowledge based. What they've learned from a textbook, or what they've learned from a PowerPoint, or a training exercise that they went on. And it can sometimes end up being a wee bit clumsy. I think the community focused stuff is probably coming more from an experience. I think if anybody gets involved in that type of work at a community level, it's probably, I'm not saying all the time, but a lot of the time it's because their families have been impacted by it, or the person themselves has been impacted by it, and they want to kind of like pass something on positive, or they've came through some kind of learning process, and they want to pass that on. So I certainly think from that point of view, it's higher up on the agenda there. I think once you get into the work setting, I think it can sometimes be a wee bit, we need to do this, we need to have some type of like, I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes the approach can be a wee bit more clumsy. I think from community point of view, I think that is a more pure type of intent. It seems to be anyway, the experience that I've had, it seems to be more that way, and that's right across the board. That's regardless of whether it's to do with mental health, or any type of disability, or even any type of community work as regards integration and anti-racism things and things like that. I think it's probably because people have been impacted by that, where it then moves into this sort of purest form, and there's a real sense of not sort of mentorship, but there's a real sense of shared learning there, which seems to be of more benefit, I think, in the long run. Well, a shift in priorities, as if you're talking about from government, from instalment. If there's any type of saving to be made, unfortunately, it's that sector that gets cut the tripe. It really does, and has done. I mean, I don't know the figures, but I would hazard a guess that they've decreased rapidly since whatever budget was being put towards the type of services that UCL provided, or even the type of community support that gets extended from instalment from 2011, when I first came into UCL, till now. So there's organisations out there who, yes, would have done all that good work that have talked about, and would have had those good, pure intentions about trying to help people. But when you just get down to the sort of numbers game, it's just not working.